So I can tell you that being from the north, there has been a lot, and I mean a lot of anger about Boris Johnson, shall we say, using Jo Cox's legacy to essentially, bully and kowtow and threaten MPs to basically do Brexit. Now, of course, we are often told that we shouldn't give in to terrorism and that we shouldn't give in to violence and threats. And yet you had Dominic Cummings essentially say, yeah, you should do Brexit or else there'll be more violence. Wow, what a wonderful man he is. So anyway, this comes, as I said last video, from the Yorkshire Post, and I quite think this sums up really the anger that is really going on in the area that, again, Boris Johnson really doesn't understand. So it's, Northerners are not stupid, and Boris Johnson should recognise this before he taints the legacy of Jo Cox, the Batley and Spen MP. So when members of Parliament talk about the language we choose to use and its impact on our constituents, there can be no greater litmus test than what happened in Batley and Spurn just over 3 years ago. My predecessor and friend Jo Cox was shot and stabbed in the sleepy village of Birstall by a white supremacist who was shouting "Britain first" as he committed his heinous crime. The language we use has impact. It matters. And I agree. And ironically, I had this exact same point I put to, shall we say, one Marcus Meacham, aka Count Dankula, who refused to say that, or even acknowledge that words have power and that can spurn people into action, and just dismissed it. But there you go. That's the free speech warrior champion absolutist who takes no opportunity to actually stand up for free speech or has anything to say about it, but that's that. So, clever people throughout history have measured their words with great seriousness, understanding the repercussions of what they and their lawmakers, legislators and leaders say. What tone they take dictates the destination of our politics, and that destination was patently obvious in this week's House of Commons debate on the Supreme Court's decision that the promulgation was unlawful. Bellowing, jeering, sneering, clapping and shouting, booming speeches full of hot air and hyperbole, wild gestures best suited to the end of the pier at Clacton. Bannon and Trump would be proud. Sadly, it got worse. During the debate on the Prime Minister's response to the judgment of the Supreme Court, rather than apologise or show any humility for misleading the Queen, Boris Johnson went on the attack, throwing a crude dog whistle language into the debate. It's a cheap trick to avoid scrutiny. The classic dead cat, goading MPs with his use of the Surrender Act, including of giving the so-called Ben Act its correct title. He seemed to be genuinely enjoying himself. Sadly, Northern MPs are extremely alive to the implications of being called a traitor. We are not collaborators bending to the whim of the European Union. We just want what's best for our constituents. A no deal would impoverish our communities, and however you voted, you didn't vote to be poorer. Which is what we've been saying all along. Brexit incredibly harms the North to a massive extent. And as I keep on telling you, the North is still suffering from deindustrialisation, the miners' strike, and the 2008 financial crash. The last thing we need is another crisis piled on top of that, because virtually none of those problems have been solved, and when you compound all those problems with the housing crisis, the social care crisis, the fact that the benefits is becoming a crisis, that people can't feed themselves, they're having to rely on food banks, and not just people out of work, but in work as well, with absolute, shoddy, unsecure work available. It's all piles on top of each other. So we pushed back, demanding he apologise, or at the very least stop, he just couldn't help himself. Challenged by my friend and neighbour, Paula Sheriff, the MP for Dewsbury, about the death threats and torrents of abuse she's received, and how this language that's tipped so easily off the PM's tongue has been hijacked by those who sought to threaten her, the Prime Minister swatted away her obvious anxiety in the most patronising, dismissive way, calling it humbug. Understandably, this brought derision and shock from all benches. Even the most loyal of Tory MPs looked green around the gills. Desperate to cut through the bravado, I asked him to stop the Bannon playbook rhetoric and the people versus Parliament shtick. I asked to stop so that we could go about our jobs knowing we were safe. His response drew gasps of horror. He said that the best way to honour the memory of Jo Cox was to get Brexit done. This wasn't casual. He knows Jo was a passionate Remainer. Only days before her death, she spent a couple of hours on the Thames with her young family campaigning to stay in the EU. And for those who say it was a misspoken moment, badly phrased, the PM had every chance to come back to the House on Thursday and explain in the urgent question raised by Jess Phillips MP. Why has he chosen this tactic? My suggestion is that he was shocked when Jeremy Corbyn, working with cross-party, refused to fall into the trap to committing of a general election. A general election which would see us distracted and the government unable to say what they were unable to negotiate a deal, and leading to a crash out of a no-deal Brexit. Something that we can't countenance, especially after the government's own impact assessments spell out in vivid, terrifying detail the devastating impact that a no deal would have on our communities and the lowest earners. I well urge all Yorkshire folk reading this article to expect more from the Prime Minister, and that civility and that hearty debate and compassion and humility. As Brendan Cox said so eloquently on Thursday, the job of the Prime Minister is, however turbulent the times, to bring people together. In Yorkshire, we see through charlatans, millionaires dressed up as the voice of the people, and we call it out. In my view, the Leave Our Town, the polite comment from a resident of Morley to the Prime Minister during his recent visit, should be projected on every northern town hall until he acknowledges we aren't stupid. We'll see through his plan and we'll call it out. Because, yet again, I have a police officer sitting in my constituency office with my staff for the second time this month. Thanks to some lovely emails threatening violence, this is more urgent than ever to stop the hate. But there is good news. Hundreds of thank you emails, grateful that MPs are challenging this strong man in power. A message from Brendan thanking me for my question. People in the street stopping me to give me a hug. This is what we mustn't forget. We decide how we react. We decide if we fall for the snake oil salesman spiel. We decide how we want to live as neighbours and friends. And by showing love, keeping the memory of Jo alive, insisting that we have far more in common than which divides us, we will get through. And I completely agree. This is absolutely shocking. And bear in mind, it wasn't the Remainers that started this campaign of rhetoric. It was the Leavers that started this. They were the ones who started calling us traitors, who started calling us collaborators, who started calling judges and people doing their jobs, doing exactly what Leave had campaigned for, the sovereignty of Parliament and laws, and they're apparently enemies of the people. Look, I call a lot of Leavers idiots and very often racists. Now, I call them idiots because, quite frankly, if you haven't seen through the absolute charlatanness of Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party, and everyone in Leave EU, the fact that they lied to you, that they cheated, the fact that they have not got your best interests at heart at all, and what they want to do to this country, and yet you still want to follow them and back them for some ungodly reason, then yeah, you are a complete idiot. Second of all, the racist thing. If you are going to say racist things and then expect no pushback by, not being called a racist, this is what they're doing. They're saying a racist thing and then going, oh, how dare you call me a racist? I'm not a racist. But then you go, why did you say racist things? Then they go, that's not racist. But it is, and you have to explain why it's racist. I'm sorry, but where I'm a Yorkshireman, if you're an idiot and you're being an idiot, I'll call you an idiot. If you're being racist, I'll call you a racist, because you are clearly being a racist. So that's not rhetoric. That is just facts. And I'm sorry if you can't accept that. Maybe instead of being angry at other people, you should stop, take a breath, and have a look at yourself for a change, rather than blaming other people for what very well may be your failings.